Hi, so today I am doing my first journal entry on autism spectrum disorder and the characteristics of that. And I've learned quite a bit in this class in reading research papers and just being around, watching videos of just different characteristics that someone with ASD would have. So I've come across a lot of newer information. I learned about ASD a long time ago, but I'm refreshing myself on all the new research. So some of the characteristics that an ASD individual may have is they may have a lack of social communication and some repetitive behaviors or certain behaviors that you typically see with ASD. So I'm going to talk about those things. Some behaviors or characteristics that you might see with someone that has ASD, they have a lack of social communication and interaction, and some um, atypical behaviors that you might find them doing. And some of these I'm going to list and tell you what they are. So, social gaze, they lack social gaze. And this you might notice in a baby who may not look at a parent or a family member. And usually, children at an early age have those smiles that they go back and forth with mom and people that they're familiar with. And children with ASD tend to lack this. And vocalizations, babies start to coo and they start to babble and they start to talk. Some early signs with ASD, they don't. So these are just some really early signs that you might see in a child that has ASD. And then as they get older, children tend to respond when their name is called. We hope they respond. But some students with ASD, they do not respond at all, or just not very frequently or selectively. And then they lack eye contact and they just don't have social interests. They're not interested in anything that's social. They stay to themselves mostly. And then they have repetitive behaviors like lining up cars or just flapping of the hands or just doing things that are over and over again. So those are some really early signs of ASD. Some other signs and behaviors seen in ASD is that they won't point and look at objects that others point to. They prefer not to be held. They have difficulty in relating with others. They have trouble expressing needs, repeat words. They call it echolalia, where they just repeat what you say. And then also a big sign of ASD is the lack of language development. Their language development is severely delayed, sometimes not at all, and they are basically nonverbal. And then another characteristic that of ASD that I recently found out more information about is sensory processing. Sensory processing is probably one of the biggest things that affect people with ASD. And I didn't realize this. This is the number one thing that I didn't think about because I do have students that are sensitive to sensory, and I didn't know exactly how to help them. And the recent stuff that I learned about was amazing because now I realized just different things about someone who might have this sensory processing dysfunction and how I could better help them. What I learned is that typically we learn through all of our senses, and we need those senses in order to learn and process information. And people with ASD, they don't have that, or it's just all mangled and wired incorrectly, so they're not processing it correctly. And I learned that up to about 90% of people with ASD do have sensory processing dysfunction. All of them have auditory dysfunction. So that right there would explain to us why you typically do see people with ASD covering their ears, because the auditory, it's not how we hear it. And that's what made me really um, think, and just about some of my students, how it affects them. And another thing I want to note is that most of their behaviors are not bad behaviors, but they're the lack of sensory. It's a sensory processing issue. It's not a behavior, and that's another thing that made me think about some of my students, that it their behaviors when they're acting out is probably not just because they want to act out, but I think it could be connected to a sensory issue. And possibly if I tried some different techniques, I might be able to minimize those so-called behaviors, but stemmed by sensory processing. So I look forward to trying those new things in my class. I also learned that some people with ASD they're hypersensitive to sensory information, and some are hyposensitive, means they're underactive. And then sometimes they have a little bit of both, and many have unstable sensory load. So that's not good. That makes it hard to function. If there's so much going on, they can't process all the information at once. So it's really important to really figure out what the needs of the person with ASD has for sensory processing. And I did know and use some of the supports that I learned about in some of my readings. But one of them is visual schedules, and I actually use that with my students that do have autism, because it helps them transition very easily. And then there's lots of sensory tools, which I have used the weighted vest, but I would like to get some different sensory supports in my class. And some of them, some of the students may have sensory overload, and you have to be careful to watch out for that. So it's important to make sure that you have a perfect sensory diet for the students or children or adults with ASD, just to make sure that they are getting the right kind of sensory integration. The best way to do it is trial and error. So I look forward to just being able to try these new things on different students and see how I could better support them in their education. And also I learned that sometimes toxins, like with chemicals and things like that, have also bothered people with ASD. And I did not know, and I was not aware of the new information on the use of MRI. They are able to scan the brain now, and they are able to do it during their sleep. So they're able to do numerous kids. So it's not just the ones that will sit still for a long time. It's even the ones that won't sit still. So they've been able to really look at the brain, and they've noticed that there is an enlarged frontal and temporal lobes. And they've been able to get a lot of rich data from these MRIs. So that is exciting to hear and find out. And I look forward to learning more about that, because I think there's so much more to be discovered. To conclude, I have learned a lot about ASD and the characteristics and the signs of autism. And being aware is the most important thing. Learning about the characteristics and what to look for and how you can help is what's important. So I look forward to learning more through all of my class.